This original WSRE presentation is made possible by viewers like you. Thank you.
He has redefined the meaning of leadership in the healthcare industry. He's a best-selling author and the founder and chief executive officer of a leading healthcare consulting company. Quint Studer on this edition of Conversations. When you graduate high school with a 1.3 grade point average, the smart money says you probably will not rise to the top of your chosen industry. But grades don't always tell the whole story. In the late 1960s, betting on Quint Studer would have been a long shot that has paid off quite handsomely. I should tell you, Studer did manage to get into college and went so far as to earn a master's degree. Before getting into healthcare, he taught special education for 10 years. Once in healthcare, he rose through the ranks, ultimately becoming president of a hospital. He was respected, successful, and making good money. So he left to start his own business. That was in the year 2000. Since then, the Studer Group has grown into a multi-million-dollar company and is one of the premier healthcare consulting firms in the nation. Studer himself has written 5 books, including 2 bestsellers, Hardwiring Excellence and Results That Last. Recently, he and his wife Rishi invested about $17 million to purchase and relocate the Carolina Mudcats to Pensacola, Florida. The Mudcats are the AA affiliate of the Cincinnati Reds. Studer has not been afraid to share his success. His charitable endeavors reach well into the millions. Quint Studer, welcome to Conversations.
Thank you, Jeff. Pleasure to be here.
You have built quite a business in the healthcare industry, but I've read a little bit about you and I'm curious. It hasn't always been an easy path for you. Take me back to Quint Studer the kid.
Well, Quint Studer the kid was a very small child. I was always either the smallest child in my class or I was always excited if there was one kid smaller than me. Remember in 8th grade, they lined you up by height.
Right.
And we had like 150 kids in our 8th grade graduation class. And maybe this is me, but as a male, you don't want to be number 2.
Right.
So I was always a very small kid. I had a speech impediment, which it was not till about the 2nd grade where I was very understandable. And of course, I've always had a bit of a hearing impairment. So I think Quint Studer the kid was somebody that had great passion about sports, great excitement about doing things. Yet, and it was no one's fault, it's maybe just the DNA genetics, and always underbelly that I don't measure up, I don't fit in, I just am not going to make it. I think a real lack of self-confidence. And sometimes when I had such a lack of self-confidence, I think I would overcompensate by acting more confident. Mm-hmm. But then that even scared me more because I'm thinking, well, but I really can't. So I think there was a lot of fear that drove my life as a young child.
Was there something that changed it all?
Yeah, failure. I think it was absolutely failure, and it was the fact that I'm doing everything I can to be successful, but no matter what happened, I just still didn't feel successful. I remember going to a psychiatrist one time, and the psychiatrist said, you know, Quint, you just got to be yourself. And I'm thinking, my gosh, that's the last person I want to be with. Give me somebody else to be. I don't want to be me. And of course, then what happened is, you know, I found that when I drank or I used alcohol, some of those inferiority complex feelings went away. I felt stronger, bigger, more confident, more secure. And it worked. And then, of course, alcohol for me quit working. But other people knew it quit working, except I was the last to know. It's a disease that tells you don't have a disease. And when I was 31 years old, I just woke up one day and a real miracle. For some reason, this kid or adult now, still acted like a kid who didn't have any ability to assess themselves. And when they did, they assessed it very rationalizing, unlucky, wrong circumstances. It was never my fault. I was the victim of victims. It hit me that something's wrong here. Something's wrong here. And so I guess what they call it is you got to surrender to win. Mm-hmm. And at that moment when I surrendered, I think I became a more teachable human being.
When you surrendered, did you get involved in like AA or some kind of program like that?
Well, you have to be real careful because the traditions don't allow you to talk about that.
Okay.
But I got very, very involved, and I'm still very involved in a 12-step program.
Okay, very good. Any advice to anyone out there who may be suffering similar circumstances?
Hope. I think when you're in this situation, you think there's no hope. You think you're going to feel like this the rest of your life, and so you try to do it on your own. Mm-hmm. And then you're going through these natural feelings, but you get afraid. you know, because it gets hard, because that alcohol or that drink was the thing that got you over the edge, over the hump. And so when you hit those crisis moments, you always have that habit to turn to what worked before. And I think when you get into any type of fellowship where you have hope, you have people before you that you see it works. You can go learn from them. And sometimes you just have to learn that this too shall pass. So instead of getting nervous and projecting, oh my God, I'm going to feel like this the rest of my life, you don't. So it's really truly that living one day at a time they talk about. And sometimes it's 1 hour at a time.
Yeah. And I guess you really have to give it time too, don't you? Not to be in a hurry.
Well, like anything, I think you know, it's when you are acquiring new skills. What I found out when I was 31 years old is I was still stuck at about a 16 or 17-year-old. It's very common for somebody with a drinking situation or a drug situation. When they start using, their maturity stops. And all of a sudden you wake up and you're a certain age and you still have the emotions of a young child, or depending on when you started. So I think it's really learning those skills. I remember I had a lot of debt, and I went up to somebody in the fellowship and I said, I got a lot of debt, I'm going to declare bankruptcy. And he said, I got a really good idea. We're going to pay people back. I said, I hadn't thought of that. You know, I was looking for that easy way out. Yeah, so actually, 6 years later, it took me 6 years to pay off everybody. And that's something I didn't know how to do. It might seem crazy because we can be very intelligent, handle some very complex things, but some simple things just overwhelm us. Yeah. And you have to get through that. You know, the nervousness of going to an event, the nervousness of doing something new. So you end up having alcohol helps you get through it, and then unfortunately it quits working and you don't know it. Yeah.
Let's talk about your business career. You're talking about being in debt. What reversed your career to get you out of debt and accelerate to you building a major company in the healthcare industry?
Well, I think what happened is when you get involved in your own recovery, you quit putting yourself first and you start doing other things. And when the first things you do is you ask each day for your own defects to be removed, to not be self-centered, to think about other people. And one of my greatest stories I think is sort of funny. When I taught, I really wanted to be Teacher of the Year because I wanted that external, you're okay, when you don't feel internally you're okay. Right. I worked every year to win Teacher of the Year, honest to gosh. I lobbied. I had people write letters. Then every year I'd lose. And whoever would win, I'd say, oh, I don't like that guy. No, I didn't even know that guy. Right. I just didn't like him because I was jealous. I was resentments. Why can't I win? So the first year that I quit drinking, first year and a half, I didn't worry about it. I just focused on being a good teacher. And one day I got a phone call from the superintendent, and he says, we need to see you. And I'm thinking, oh my gosh, what did I do now? Yeah. I'm thinking of everything I could have possibly done for the last 10 years. I sit down, and he says, oh, we just named you Teacher of the Year. And see, it's when I quit trying to win the award, but just did the work, I won the award. Yeah. And ironically, the guy who I thought was such a bad guy who won it the year before got up and said such nice things about me. So the issue was never him, the issue was me. And from that, I ended up working in a drug and alcohol treatment center because I'm very interested in recovery, what it can do. So I did that for 3 years, and that was actually how I got into healthcare. Okay. And I tend to have a knack. I taught special ed, and when you teach special ed, your goal is to maximize someone's human potential, and you have to set high goals. And so when you look at life, it's maximizing your own potential and setting high goals. And I parlayed that into calling on personnel directors who might have employees with impairments. And of course, some of those were in hospitals. And then a human resource director said, you know, we have a job here in marketing. You do a nice job there. Why don't you come here? And then I came there and sort of kept doing the deal and, you know, worked my way up to eventually being president of a hospital.
When you were teaching special education, as you look back on it, what was the most important thing you took away from that experience?
Well, I was probably a little more self-oriented than anything else. I think I taught special education at first because it made me feel good. Yeah. I was so desperate to feel good, and those kids made me feel good. Yeah. The second thing, though, I really took away is how we underestimate the human potential that human beings have. When I first started teaching special ed, it was when they were first they were closing the colonies. They had colonies where all the people with special needs would sort of be institutionalized. And they started releasing these children into the public schools. And at the time, it was, well, that boys, you know, they used different names that some people don't use today, but they use names like retarded or something like that. And then as soon as they labeled the child, it was almost like, here's their expectations. And a fellow named Mark Gold did some research at Southern Illinois University, and he showed that if you do certain tools and certain techniques, usually taking complex things and breaking them into simple steps and do a step at a time, that many children that you thought had this much potential had this much potential. So I think the thing I learned about special education is not to underestimate someone's human potential. And I think that's the same thing we do with a business. Don't underestimate what our business can be. And I think the same thing with the community. Don't underestimate what a community can be.
I was reading in your book, and I want you to tell this story about the young lady that I believe was one of your students who wore her McDonald's uniform even though
Loved
she
it.
wasn't at work. Tell that story.
Yeah, one of the things I did in teaching is my job was to go out and talk employers into hiring people with special needs. And I always had to say, they sort of wanted to do it, but what if it didn't work? I don't want to be the one to tell the special needs student, I'm firing you. Right. So I'd always agree that I'd be the fire. Okay. I'd be the fire. And so we placed Barbara in this job. And Barbara worked at McDonald's. And they were very wonderful because they helped her make malts. Again, you have to keep it simple. She might not be able to do 100 things, but she could be the malt maker, and that's how they started her. They worked her in the afternoon, sort of before the late crunch and before after the lunch. So between lunch and after school, those 2 hours, because they didn't want to put her in a stressful situation because she learned it. Because a lot of it's frequency. Right, the more you do it, the better you get. The more you do it, the better you get. So we had her schedule because on days that she worked, she'd wear her McDonald's outfit, and her mother would pick her up to take her to work. So all of a sudden one day she comes in with her McDonald's outfit. I'll never forget because they're wearing a purple pantsuit that year. And I look at the schedule and she doesn't work. So I sit down with her to explain to Barbara on days that she doesn't work, she doesn't need to wear her McDonald's outfit. And all of a sudden it hits me. She wants to wear her McDonald's outfit. Because you know, when she went to work, she didn't feel retarded. She didn't feel like a spec ed kid. She felt like everybody else. And that's what we all want. We all want to feel that we fit in, and I could relate to her feeling. And then the other thing I found out is when she wore that McDonald's outfit through the hallways of the high school, she wasn't treated the same way. Kids treated her with a certain respect. So I always remembered that. I also remember her mother sitting in the parking lot watching her work. When you think about that, when you have a child with special needs, you have some concerns many parents will never face with. What happens if I die before my child? Yeah. So how would you like to go through life sort of hoping your child might pass away before you? Not because you want your child to pass away, because the other options. And she probably knew her daughter wouldn't do some things, but she wanted to watch her daughter work. So she'd sit in the parking lot and watch her daughter work. And that's the magic of working with people with special needs.
Wow, great story. What's the lesson for the business world?
Don't underestimate the human potential of yourself or your company.
Yeah. Concentrate on people.
Oh, you have to do people.
Yeah.
It's not facilities, it's not technology, it's all about the people.
Yeah. When you went to the hospital in Chicago, tell the story of how you turned that around.
Well, I think when I say I think it was a group of people. I was lucky enough to be hired by a fellow named Mark Clement, who took a risk on me. I didn't have a master's in healthcare administration, didn't have an MBA. Many search firms told me I wasn't placeable beyond what I was doing because I didn't have the right credentials, the right pedigree. I call myself a mutt in healthcare. And Mark had all the credentials, but Mark gave me a chance in an inner city hospital, which really resonated with this underdog. People didn't think it could be good. And so I think the real key there was first getting our organization to believe in itself. And I think the message, I remember going to a meeting and the employees were all talking about needing another consultant, another planner. And here I am a consultant, and I said, no, we have the right plan. It's about execution. Yeah. And then I think it's really listening to the employees. You know, instead of saying, here's what you can, what happens with a lot of us, we tell employees what they can do for us. And it really starts off with, what can I do for you? You know, what can I said to nurses, what can I do to make this a good place for you to work? And first they sort of look at you like, are you kidding me? And they said, well, fix our copy machine. And I said, why? They said, our copy machine's broke. We have to go to another unit to make copies. That means we miss call-outs from the patients. The patients get upset. And if you could fix our copy machine, it would really help us take better care of patients. So you fix the copy machine. And it's not all that simple all the time. Right. But if the employees don't have the basic tools and equipment to do the job, you lose credibility as a leader because they believe you're asking them to do things, but you're not providing them the resources to do them with.
What makes a good leader?
Excuse me?
What makes a good leader?
Oh, I think there's all sorts of combinations. I think authenticity is really important. I don't think you have to be a perfect leader, but I think you have to be an authentic leader. I've seen leaders get up and say, I don't really know what to do. I'm sort of confused here. Can you help me? And get a standing ovation.
Right.
So I think authenticity is a really important thing. I think it's also really knowing that you're going to treat people fairly but not equally. And what I mean by that is you have to know which employees you need to retain the most, you have to be the most positive with, which employees it's development. I called in my book Results at Last, what's the what? We all have different what. For somebody, the what might be me knowing their kids' names. Right. For another person, it might be, will you mentor me and be involved in my development? Right. For another what, it might be get me the tools and equipment to do the job. For another what, it might be reward and recognition. So I think as a leader, we have to really figure out what every employee's what is and do the best job meeting it. And if we can't meet it, it might not be a good relationship. You can't, I say in my book, you can't get everyone on board. Right. And I think we set up many managers for failure because they get a job, there's new supervisor, and they think they're going to get everybody on board. Right. And then they read a book and they can't get somebody on board. And then they go home every day feeling like a failure because we take our failures home more than our successes. So I think sometimes you have to admit there's certain people that aren't going to get on board, and you probably have to get them off board because it's just not going to work.
How do you do that? You just encourage them to move on? You fire them? What's the best strategy?
Well, it depends on the employee. I think there's 3 strategies that many of us forget. You just can't say, these are problem employees. You got to first of all look at, well, are they a problem employee because maybe they're frustrated because tools aren't there, equipment there, they haven't had development. First you have to assess the situation and diagnose a bit. And then you have to look at your 3 components. Your very high performers you need to stay close to. Where most leaders make a mistake is they spend 90% of their time with these few group of low performers, and their high performers are wondering, what am I? Right. So you have to get your high performers with you. And we have various techniques about where the organization's going, why you're, Jeff, I'm so excited about where our TV station is going. Right. And you're a big part of that. Right. Let me tell you why, Jeff. Right. I hope you're here for a long time. What do we need to do to keep you? That's a high, and then you walk out feeling great. Right. The middle performer really wants to know more about how am I doing and are you invested in me? So I'd say, Jeff, I want to tell you an important part of our TV station here. Let me tell you all the things you do well. And one of the things we are is we're committed to your development. So I'd like to talk about us investing in your development so you can be the best you can be because we're committed to you. And let me go again and tell you, review why you're an important part here. Then you walk out feeling pretty good. And that's important because that low performer wants you to stay back with them. Because the low performer likes the culture where it is because then they don't have to change. Right. Then when you get to the low performer, they're isolated. You describe their behavior. You explain why that's not meeting expectations. You show them how they're willing to help, or you might even encourage them to go in an employee assistance program. There's personal issues. You let them know the consequences. But you let them know that what has been permitted is no longer going to be permitted. Because what we permit, we promote. Yeah. And that's sort of the technique that we use.
Interesting. When you left being president of a hospital and went out on your own, you had a comfortable job, you had a great situation. What was it that made Quint Studer say, I'm going to leave this great situation and give it a shot?
It was very scary. Because, when you're a special ed teacher, there's a little bit of something called job security. Right. And even though we can talk and all about healthcare, there's a pretty good sense of job security in healthcare, especially with people aging. Right. I become president of a hospital. I had a pretty good salary, got more money than I ever dreamed I would ever make in my entire life. So there's a fear. There's a fear of that. But there's also a calling. And I was really struggling with the fact that other hospitals were saying, can you help us? Other places were saying with you would help us. So I hired a lady who was a strategic planner, and I brought her in for a weekend, paid for her personally, and her goal was to look at all the objective data and convince me not to start my own company. Because I thought, why would I leave this pension? I gave everything away, pension, everything, for full risk. The day I quit my job, I had a $15,000 on the books for the next year. So she went through all the objective data and said, no, I really think you should start your own company. Well, then I also found a fellow who I believe really has a good spiritual connection. Norm Adams is his name, 80 years old. I went to Norm and I said, what should I do? And he told me to read a chapter in a book called Power of Constructive Thinking by Emmett Fox. And it's called The Heart Aroused. And it talks about in periods of life, we're going to have situations where our heart gets aroused. Yeah. And most people have been programmed not to follow their heart because it's not practical, the money might not be there. But he says there are certain times in everyone's life when you have to follow your heart. And unfortunately, most people don't, so they really don't know what they missed. And then there's a story that I could relate to. It said there was a little girl that was thirsty, so the father hooked up the hose, turned on the water, and showed her how to hold the hose. She could drink water. And she was drinking the water, and then she just, like kids do, she moved her foot and was stepping on the hose. And the water stopped running. So she said to her dad, "There's no more water." And the father said, "Take your foot off the hose." And I walked away from that saying, maybe I need to take my foot off the hose. So it sort of was a combination of practical and a more emotional decision.
Why are people so afraid to take risk and follow their passion?
Well, I think there's tremendous odds of failure. I mean, the odds are most new businesses don't make it. So I think it's a tremendous amount of failure. I think it's a tremendous commitment to your family. I mean, how can I put my family at risk here? I think it's sometimes lack of capital. I mean, I was very fortunate, and I don't have a business where you have to buy a lot of kitchen equipment, you have to buy a lot of technology. It's a human capital business. So I think there's all sorts of combinations on why that is, and sometimes it's a family situation, financial situation, and so on.
Do you think there's anything that people can do to prepare? Because so many people dream of having their own business. Is there
Yes.
anything that you can do to prepare yourself?
Well, I think so. I think I had a visit the other day from a young lady, and she said, "You know, I'm 53 years old. I'm doing this job, but my real passion is over here. My passion's in theater, and I did a little theater, but then I quit it to do this job." Right. She said, "I'm to that point where I think I should just quit my job and go to New York or Chicago and try to do theater." Well, I go to New York and Chicago. There's a lot of theater people waiting, restaurants, driving cabs. It's tough, and she's got this job. So I looked at her and I said, "Well, here's what I would recommend, and here's what I did." Well, I had my full-time job. I was lucky enough to work for an organization. I was totally honest with them and said I'd like to do some things on the side. And I had an agreement with them and said I'd like to do some work on the side. And they understood on my vacation day I would do that. So what I recommended to her was, don't go from here to here. Why don't you keep your current job, do the best job you can? That's the thing. People get so busy worrying about their next job, they miss the job they're in. Right. And I said, why don't you do some theater locally? Get back engaged, get involved. And then if you know people in New York, why don't you go up every 90 days, meet with these people, tell them what you're doing, be excited about it. And somebody, if you really have talent, is going to say, have you ever thought of coming up here and doing it? So I think you can try to create transition periods. For me, I did it enough on the part-time basis that I didn't know I could do really, really well. But I thought I could do well enough where I wouldn't starve. Right. I had that built up. The second point is, and maybe this is my safety net I needed, I figured even if it didn't work, I could still go back and be the president of a hospital because I had success there, and I like that job too.
Right. What's your favorite part of what you do now?
Watching people grow. I love watching other people's success. I really do. I get more excited about seeing other people win awards, other people have success. So for the fact we got a University Medical Center in Tucson, the terrible tragedy, we work with that organization. Now, I'm not saying we had anything to do with their great response to the tragedy, but you know, it's sort of nice when they thanked us for working with their organization. We had a hospital in Ottawa, Canada, send us a note from a young boy, and he was thanking the hospital for saving their mom's life. And he said, I'm only 9 years old, but I've got a big heart, and I want to thank you for saving my mother. No one's ever done anything so nice for me before. And it's that impact. And it's not only that impact on the patient, it's an impact on that employee. I used to love when the employees would come in, and I'd always go up to all the employees when they brought their children in. And they'd come in like this. I remember a security guy walking in, he's going to get his paycheck. And I'd say, I'd introduce myself, and then I'd turn to the child, and I'd say, I really like it here. I work for your dad. And they'd look at me, and they'd look at their dad, and their dad would try to explain to them, well, that's the president of the hospital. And the kids say, but he says he works for you. and I love that because I think I did. Yeah. I did. So I think what makes me feel good is watching other people enjoy their job, enjoy their growth. It's like I got very involved in Special Olympics. Yeah. You get just as thrilled watching that girl run across that finish line, whether she's last, but everybody grabbing her. So what excites me the most is watching other people have success.
Got about 2 minutes. Let's talk baseball.
All right.
You just bought the AA team,
right.
Cincinnati Reds.
Right.
Where did the love from baseball come?
I always had it. I don't know what it is. I used to sit in my kitchen or my bedroom with masking tape and make little ballparks and pretend with little players. And my mom would yell at me because she'd have to pull this masking tape up all the time. I loved radio, and I used to listen to games on the radio. And I think it's one of those sports that even if you're not good athletically, you can still like it. Yeah. You can still do it. So I think it also comes with the culture, the history. I don't know. I think there's certain people like cooking, certain people like gardening, certain people. My dad loves working. My dad loved engines, so he wanted to always have his rear end hanging in a car working on an engine. So me, I always sort of like baseball.
Good deal. In about 1 minute, what's next for Quint Studer?
Years ago, they asked me what I wanted to do, and I sort of said I'd like to be a full-time volunteer employee of the community. I really want to continue to see communities grow. Because I think when communities grow, the people grow, the citizens grow, the jobs grow, the economy grows, the quality of life grows. So I just want to keep doing what's in front of me. And, first of all, make sure I, stay sober. That's goal one. And goal two is just doing what's the next thing in front of me and asking God's direction each day for what He would want me to do.
Quint Studer, it's been a real pleasure.
It's been a pleasure to be here. Thank you so much.
Wish you the best of luck.
Thank you.
Quint Studer, he is the president, or I should say the founder and CEO of the Studer Group, and of course they are a highly prestigious firm in the medical field. He's also the author of a couple of books. One is entitled Results That Last. It was a Wall Street Journal bestseller. The other, Hardwiring Excellence, and might be worth a read, not only if you're in the medical field, but also in other businesses. I think you can find an awful lot of good information that is applicable to numerous businesses. Speaking of business, in the social media world, you can find us on Facebook. All you have to do is search out Conversations from Jeff Weeks. We'd love to have your input. I really do appreciate you spending some time with us. Hope you enjoyed this broadcast. I'm Jeff Weeks. Take good care of yourself. We'll see you soon.
Support for this program is provided in part by these corporate sponsors. And by viewers like you.
I'm Jeff Weeks, and I love to talk, but I find I learn a lot more when I listen. I hope you'll listen in on the next Conversations. We talk with engaging personalities from all walks of life. Sports, business, politics, science, entertainment, literature, you name it. Some are names you know, others are ones you'll be glad to get to know. No talking points or agenda-driven tirades. It's real conversation that matters.
Conversations with Jeff Weeks, Thursday at 7:30 and Friday at 9.